This will be a short flight from Ontario, Oregon to Boise. In the first frame here, we're looking at the props to see what position they're in. They're in the feathered position, and they have to be changed to a flat position so that it doesn't load down the engines. And we'll start by turning off the electrical switches that will have full power to the batteries. Turn off the master avionics switches here. Go to the generators left and right, and we'll turn the fuel pumps on. Look down at the power controls. We need to bring the condition levers back. We need to bring the throttle levers all the way back into the beta position in the reverse thrust so we can turn on the hydraulic pumps to pressure the blades to return to a flat position so the prop pins can be put in. While we're waiting, we'll turn on the flaps, put on one notch of flaps, and bring the elevator trim back to normal. Waiting for a 10 seconds countdown on the oil pumps, so go ahead and set the airport elevation here for cabin pressure at Ontario. And then we can bring the props back to the idle position for starting. We'll start with the left engine first. The engines will cycle through, and they'll come back and stabilize at a certain point, at which time we'll go to the other engine. Look over to the right, you'll see the annunciator panel that shows the left beta in green, which means that the levers are in the correct position for starting. This is all done through electronics. And as soon as the left settles down, it looks like the left has started. We'll go up to the right. Start the right engine. And we'll watch the right engine gauges. Keeping an eye on the EGT, the exhaust gas temperature. As soon as it settles down, we'll take out the propeller locks so that the props can be controlled in flight for different pitch angles. Otherwise, they'd remain in a flat position and they'd have no torque. Both engines are stabilized now. Individually, we'll bring the throttle back on each engine and then return it to the idle position. You'll hear a voice call out, "Start locks removed," when the second one is done. We're watching the engine to stabilize before we go over to the next engine. And then bring it back to the idle position. Both engines are now almost stabilized. Now we'll turn our electrical panels back on. Avionics master switch is back on, the generator is back on, and the electric fuel pump's off. Now we'll start with weight and balance. We can see that weight and balance is in the red, so we're a little overweight. Should total add up to 2440, so for a matter of ease, we'll just kick off about 6 passengers here. And we brought it back within operating limits. We can put that pad away now. We'll look to the nav control, nav 1 and nav 2, and turn both of those on. We'll look up to our nav 1 frequency, and for Boise that's 111.1. Check the green light below that shows that everything, the flight management system is controlled by the pilot rather than the co-pilot's instruments. We'll turn on the spoilers for landing at Boise. And now we'll program our flight management system. Look up and see the flaps are set at 9. Identify that we live. We are here at Ontario. Now we're going to enter the flight plan, which is Ontario, K-O-N-O, to Boise, K-B-O-I. And we'll save our flight plan. And we'll enter other data, which will be the fuel reserve on the land at Boise. We want to have at least 800 pounds. Then we'll enter the payload. For ease of entry, we'll just put in 3,500. Then we'll enter our vertical navigation, which will be our cruise altitude. Today we'll make that 6,500. And we'll return control of this flight management system to the instruments on the dash. We're ready to set those up. Top is the ADI, and we'll rotate the control to the bottom HSI, lateral navigation. Click on lateral navigation, and the desired track is brought up on that. The heading is 0, so I want to change that. To make things easier in flight, we'll rotate the heading bug around to the 113 position. So if things get really busy, we can just switch over the heading, or if something happens to one of the instruments. And we'll also change the altitude to 6,500. We'll rotate down on the ADI. Look at the top right. These instruments right here are the 4 speed bugs. First one will be the desired approach speed, which is 123 knots. Rotate that down to 123. And this next one will be the cyan, which is the rotate speed. That will be 109. And the next one will be the single engine takeoff speed. It'll be 110. And the final will be the speed you want to touch down at, about 129. And we'll bring it back up to the rotate. And we'll enter the heading on the flight control panel, flight director. Enter the altitude select that will level out at 65. We'll click on the little button over here that will buzz if we've missed any steps. Looks like we're good to go. Both engines running, no smoke. Last minute check to make sure everything's okay. Move the condition levers all the way forward.
Condition levers flight.
Check down the runway. A couple of last minute checks. We'll be making a left turn slightly to get on course as soon as we get up in the air. Looks good. 1 notch of flaps. Elevator trim correct. Release the brakes.
power set.
Next call out will be 70 knots.
70 knots.
And the final will be rotate.
V1, rotate. Positive rate of climb.
Now we can put the gear up. Bring the flaps up.
Gear up. Flaps up.
Now 400 feet, we can turn the line up on course. Try to roll out on 113. And we'll try to lock in the rate of climb by pushing the VS, vertical speed button. Click on the navigation button. It says capture, so it's able to pick that up. Climbing to 4,600 feet. Thousand-foot warning. Coming up on 6,500 feet. Overshot by 100 feet. Making a slight correction to get back on the radial to Boise. 206 knots. Altitude is about where we want it. 38 miles to Boise. Now we're going to reduce the cruising power, and we'll do that by pulling the throttles back. To bring the exhaust gas temperature down to the white hash mark, or I should say up to the white hash mark, and release it to the condition lever, move it down to get 98%, and you'll end up just below the EGT limit. We're still at 6,500 feet. Let's go down to about 41 or 44. So we'll be at the correct altitude when we enter the ILS pattern in Boise. So we'll rotate that down to 4,400 feet. Take off the altitude hold. Put it on altitude select. And we'll start reducing the power until we get down. Put on indicated IAS, indicated airspeed. And it'll try to hold that airspeed as we reduce powers, which means we'll start descending and maintain the same speed. You can see we're dropping down 600 feet a minute. Autopilot is on. Getting slightly over speed. 2 knots and the buzzer goes off. See the DME kicked in. We're 27.6 in Boise. Picked up the VOR. Looks like the weather is clearing a little bit. .261 ground knots speed. We're going to set the heading over about 10 or 15 degrees to the right so we can make a little detour to come inbound on the correct radial at Boise, which is about 098, runway 10. There are 21.2 miles from Boise. Getting within range. Actuate the heading button. Get on course. Need to slow down so we can actuate the landing gear knob. Bring the gear down at about 180 knots. We're approaching our target altitude. And we're about ready to capture the altitude and hold it there.
Condition levers flight.
Move our condition levers forward so we'll have access to full power if we need it. We're going to bring our power back so we can slow the aircraft down, probably less than 40% torque. We're about 197, 96. Takes a while to slow this airplane down. About ready to bring the gear down. Let's see if we're within range by pressing the VOR localizer button. Nope, shows up in red. We're still out about 19 miles, it looks like. Try it again. There we go. We pressed the approach button and the approach button locked on, making a turn down the radial. Bring the gear down.
Gear down. Flaps 15.
Bring the flaps down to slow the plane down. Localizer is right on. Glide slope is just above us.
Flaps 25.
Full flaps. 130 knots. You can see the VASI lights in the distance, red and white. Red, all red is too low, all white is too high, red and white is just right. Seven and a half miles. Crossing over Franklin, and looks like the interstate on the right. You can see the business district of Boise on the left. Outer marker is blinking. Glide slope is starting to move down as we intercept it. An aircraft coming our way. Now the glide slope indicators are moving down. 133 knots. Just pitched down as we captured it. Turned off the autopilot. As soon as we touch down, we'll deploy the spoilers.
Sink rate, 30, 20,
118.
10,
And the spoilers. Bring the flaps up so we can apply the brakes.
7 knots.
Bring the throttles back to idle position. And we'll stop and bring the condition levers back to taxi position.
Condition levers taxi.
Take a look and see where we ended up from the air. Looks like we pulled off about the halfway mark. Maybe slightly more. Okay, we'll take a look both ways, across the runway, and see if we can find a parking spot. too much power applied, you get the warning buzzer. If we can find a parking spot. Nope, none there. Well, maybe we can park in there. Brakes on. Turn the electrical off. Turn the engines off first. Bring the props back at less than 50%. The throttle's back at less than 50%. And now the electrical. Props look good. Stop latches are in. Yep. And we'll let the crew out here. And the passengers.